Hi again guys, and welcome to another installment of Beards and Cars. If I sound a little bit off, it's probably because I'm recording it pretty early in the day. And for this pick, I wanted to go into a discussion which we've kind of touched on before in a couple of dedicated episodes of this same series, like 10 cars that you'd like to see come to the game for the first time, 10 cars that you'd like to see return to the game, 10 tracks, all that kind of stuff, and also stuff that we do and don't like about GT Sport. So in effect, this particular video is kind of like our opportunity as a community to roll those 4 or 5 individual countdowns in effect into one, and to actually allow those people, for instance, who are on this channel, and there are tons of people who are like it who aren't on the channel as well, who are basically the kind of people that you see in the comments sections underneath every new update or every new teaser for the next update, the next patch on GT Sport. And you know the kind of people that I'm going to say. The kind of people who always say, I didn't want this car, I didn't want that car, I didn't want this track, I wanted this car, these cars, these tracks. And it can get kind of annoying. So this could be kind of a cathartic experience to some degree for those people, but also for those of us who actually are grateful for the things that we get, which of course is the majority of us, thankfully. This is an opportunity for us to actually, as I said, combine those 4 or 5 video concepts and actually make it feel a little bit more real. Because my concept for this video actually struck me while I was playing Blue Moon Bay and grinding that event to buy the Ferrari 250 GTO, because a lot of you guys ask me, oh, how can you do that event so many times? I've got 210 victories on that race, at least at the time of releasing this video, so how can I keep doing that at 10-12 minutes every time without getting completely bored out of my mind? Well, I'm not going to say that I'm not bored sometimes. Of course, I don't run the race all day. I tend to do it for maybe between 3 and 6 times a day whenever I need the money. And then if I don't need the money, I might do it once or twice, because it's only 12 minutes. That's not really that much. So this idea came to me while doing one of those events, because I actually like to just sit and think while I'm doing those races. You can pretty much drive on autopilot, and those are where some of my best ideas come from. So I was thinking to myself about, in particular, the Ferrari 250 GTO. Well, some people would want that car, some people wouldn't. And then it struck me, why not have a Beards and Cars episode where we essentially break down and make feel more real what our personal ultimate update would be? But there are some rules. And the first rule is the most important one of all, and this rule that I'm about to say, for the sake of this little game, should govern all of your choices after this, because the primary rule is, this has to be the final update. So whatever you choose for this update, nothing else can come after it. So you have to pick cars, tracks, features and fixes that you would be happy with without getting anything else. Now of course, that's not actually going to happen in the game. We'll have a number more to come, but I wanted to make it feel like it had more stakes. So you really have to choose vehicles and tracks that you know will last you the full life cycle of the game, or at the very least give you months of interest that you can keep going back to and enjoying. So, a pretty hefty rule, in other words. It really adds the stakes to what your choices are. And in particular, as I just kind of alluded to, I wanted to break it down into the same kind of format that the updates themselves actually have. So these are kind of like the sub-rules. Now, these are the rules of the game. You can't just pick 100 cars and 50 tracks, because of course that would mean there were no stakes at all. I wanted it to feel realistic. So if we look back over the updates that we've had so far, what has the precedent been for the most part? Well, we tend to get 9 cars, sometimes 7, the last one was, but generally speaking around 9 cars. So that's the limit. You can pick 9 cars. Now you can pick any 9 cars, but as I said, it's got to be 9 cars that you'll never want anything else after. And of course, realistically, that's not going to happen. But in other words, pick them carefully. And for me, it was very difficult to narrow it down to 9. I could easily reel off 20 straight away. So you really do have to narrow it down and pick your absolute favourites. So, 9 cars. What else do they do? Well, of course, usually we get a new track, but generally we tend to get like 2 tracks, in effect. We tend to get one new one and one, for instance, new version of an existing track, a new variation, if you will. So, with that in mind, I'll allow 2 track choices. It doesn't have to be a new track, it doesn't have to be a returning track, and it doesn't have to be a variation. You can just choose any 2 circuits that you want. And it could be a returning track, a fictional one, something like Seattle or Complex String. It could be something that's never been featured in the game before, like Ricardo or various others. But just pick 2 tracks. And again, you have to bear in mind, these 2 tracks need to last you a long time. So make sure you pick ones that you can get a lot of enjoyment out of. The next thing is one which isn't as obvious a choice. In fact, the next 2 aren't as obvious, but they're 2 very important things. The first one is features, because with each new update we tend to get between 1 and say 3 or 4 new features added to the game. Stuff like better livery updates, suit liveries, helmet liveries, adding driver tars to scapes. All that kind of stuff I would include under the features category. So you can pick 3. I'm allowing 3 features to be picked because that tends to be the maximum amount of new things that we get, or at least the average. And then the final one, and this is a very important one as well, is fixes. Because of course each update aims to fix community issues that the game has. For instance, the 1.24 patch aimed to fix, amongst other things, the downshifting in the hybrid cars, including of course the Mercedes F1. So you can pick 2 fixes. Because generally speaking, you'll have anywhere between like 2 and 4, so let's say you can have 2 fixes. So that could include pretty much anything that you think is not working correctly or should be improved about the game. And I've gone fairly abstract with my 2 fixes, and you'll see when we get to that why I mean that. So I'll allow a bit of variation in that one. So 9 cars, 2 tracks, 3 new features, and 2 fixes, or at least readjustments, let's say. So what then, first of all, about my 9 cars? Well, of course, this is going to be the most variation that we'll have between us all. The tracks will be varied, but there's a good chance that some of us will have the same track choices. Some, maybe. But with the cars, as many of you know, I choose more unconventional choices. Many of you will have some of the ones that I've chosen, but many of these are ones that I have discussed before. So number 1, very easy choice for me. There's no question what number 1 was going to be. My favourite car of the entire franchise, although it's not my favourite car in the real world, of course, the Renault Espace F1. That would instantly be my first choice. And to be completely honest, I could quite easily have that as the only car to be added to the game from this point on. I would still choose the Espace F1 because it means that much to me from an upbringing point of view. It's got such a retro appeal. It's my favourite car of the franchise, as I said, so of course, the Espace F1. My next choice is my favourite race car of all time, the Howmet TX. Gran Turismo and Forza, neither have ever had a gas turbine powered car featured. Very few games have, in fact. Of course, Project Gotham has. They had my favourite vehicle, the Y2K. But no game that I'm aware of has ever featured a turbine car as standard from day one. And of course, some have had it as like patches or updates. I think, isn't it like Project Cars or something that had the Lotus Type 56? And I believe someone made a mod of a Howmet for like AC or something like that. But I mean a fully integrated Howmet TX into the game. As I said, it's my favourite race car of all time. We all know, of course, what category it would end up in, but I'll come back to that point later, because that is one of my fixes. Spoiler alert. Next car on the list for me, another one of my absolute favourites. Again, never featured in the Gran Turismo franchise, but it is awesome in every game that features it, be it Test Drive Unlimited, Project Cars, Forza, a number of others. The Maserati MC12, for 2 reasons. One, it's in my opinion the most beautiful Maserati ever made. It's definitely my favourite Maserati ever made, but also it brings Maserati back. We had them in GT6, but they're not there anymore. So it has a twofold purpose. Gorgeous car that I would drive all the time, and it would actually be pretty useful for around N500 or N600 events, depending on your tuning. I want the MC12 featured for sure. Next one on my list, well, of course, my dream car. How could I not feature my dream car, the Ferrari FF? Of course, I want the Ferrari FF featured. Again, featured in a number of other games, but never Gran Turismo. It kind of surprises me, actually, that they haven't featured this one yet. It does seem like the kind of Ferrari that would be in there, and I actually wouldn't be surprised if this car comes to GT Sport. I actually hope that it does. Well, of course I hope that it does, but at the same time, I think it's the kind of car that I could imagine being there, but I could also imagine them just not doing it, or maybe adding the GTC4 Lusso instead, which I don't like at all. I'm not a fan of that car. But, of course, the FF. The next choice is, for any who have watched my Project Gotham reviews recently, my favourite hypercar, and probably one which will not feature on many people's lists at all, certainly not in its category. Koenigsegg will easily overtake this car in most people's minds. The Ultima Aero. The SSC Ultima Aero, my favourite hypercar. I would love to experience that kind of power and performance, but in more of a realistic sense than, say, a Vision GT car would have in GT Sport. Imagine taking the Ultima Aero around the realistic interpretation of Le Mans that Gran Turismo has, because it's great to have it in Project Gotham, it's great to have it in Forza, but even as a Forza fan, as a Project Gotham fan, I've got to say, as far as track representations go, Gran Turismo is pretty difficult to beat. The tracks look very real, and although Forza looks real enough, they definitely don't look as good as Gran Turismo does. So I would love to experience a perfectly modelled Ultima Aero and really experience that performance. Next one for me is another returning brand, returning from Gran Turismo 6 once again, and one of my favourite prototype race cars, because you guys know me, there's got to be at least a couple of Le Mans prototypes in there, the Panoz LMP1 Roadster S. It was in my top 50 countdown. In fact, a number of these cars were. It's my kind of favourite, kind of second favourite, depending on the mood I'm in. Modern LMP, of course, up there with the Cadillac LMP for me as well. The reason why this one just outdid the Cadillac for me is because, to some degree, having driven them both in Forza already, you pretty much know what you're going to get with the Cadillac. It's a great car, but it's very similar to the BMW V12 LMR in terms of the way it performs. Similar kind of power limit, under 1,000 horsepower tuned, similar kind of shape as well, the more late 90s LMP 900 style, with the very low flat body, relatively few wings, and the rear spoiler is quite low as well. So if you've driven the BMW, you pretty much know what the Cadillac feels like, which is really good, but the Panoz is a completely unique experience. It's front mid-engine, like the Nissan Nismo, but it's still rear-wheel drive, so you don't have the disadvantage through corners that the Nissan has, and it's also got one of the most raw, visceral V8 sounds from that 6.2-litre V8 in the lineup of prototypes. It's an incredible handling car. The cockpit experience is incredible. It's like driving an open-top Batmobile. I think it's one of the coolest LMPs, and although it didn't have as much success as something like an R8 or a Bentley, of course, Panoz is my favourite racing team, so of course I'd want it in the game. Next up, I'm going to another prototype. This one might surprise some people, but any player of Forza 4 won't be surprised at all. I consider this to be the most beautiful modern LMP, even though it's not my favourite overall. The Gulf liveried, naturally aspirated, 6-litre V12 Aston Martin Lola. Or to be more technically specific, the Aston Martin Lola B09-60. Look at this car. It is perfection as far as the visuals go. It's got a big capacity V12, like I said, which is very rare for a modern prototype. And although it didn't actually, of course, win the Le Mans, because it was outpaced by the diesel's efficiency, it's just an awesome car. It sounds better than a modern Formula car. The performance is fantastic. The handling is very smooth, very precise. And if it weren't for the diesels, I think this car would have had a good chance to win. If, for instance, the Audis, etc. of the time were also petrol, well, they'd have lost that huge advantage, and I think the Aston would have had a much better chance of actually winning. But it didn't. That's the way history went. I would love to have this one in the game. Again, for a couple of reasons. It gives Aston Martin more usability, not just luxury road cars. And as I said before, anyone who's played Forza 4 knows exactly how good a car it can be. It's easily one of the best prototypes in the game, and it's a shame that it wasn't featured since. It would be its debut, obviously, in the Gran Turismo franchise, and it's a car that I would love to see featured. It's so different in terms of the sound, the performance, to pretty much any of the other prototypes that we've had. Next up on the list, I'm putting kind of a race car for the road, and of all of the cars on my list, this would probably be the most hated in online lobbies because of how OP it would be. And in particular, I'm thinking of around the N500 to N600, but also N400 if you detuned it classes, and that is the Mosler MT900S. Again, one of my favourite cars. Unfortunately, Mosler liquidated a few years ago now. They only sold like 100 cars in the history of the company, or like 200 cars, something like that. But for any who are unfamiliar with Mosler, they're amazing. Their entire history of cars is amazing. Started in the 90s. Originally, it wasn't the prettiest of cars, but it was very effective. Then it kind of evolved into the MT900, then the MT900S, the MT900 Photon, the GTR, of course. And the GTR is the obvious choice to go for. It's the fastest of the road cars, 212 miles per hour, 0 to 60 in 3.2. But the reason why I would go for the MT900S instead is because it's got a more blank slate kind of visual that you can work on. You can always make it look like a GTR if you wanted to, but more importantly than that, it has a lot less power. It has around 530 horsepower instead of 600 on the GTR, which means that in lower racing, if you do detune it for, say, N400, it could be a fantastic track car. It would make the Porsche GT3 look fairly mainstream. And if you think that's OP, it's got nothing on the Mosler. It's essentially like a road-going prototype meets late 90s GT1 car. It's an incredible car, great handling, Corvette power, mid-engine rear-wheel drive. I personally think it looks fantastic. Little bit of an XJ220 kind of vibe at the front with like a Corvette Daytona prototype look at the back. Great car. I'd love to see it featured in the franchise. That one's never going to happen, I don't think, but I would really love it if it did. And then finally, the last slot is always the most difficult one to assign because there are so many cars that I'd love to see. Cadillac 16, Cadillac Buick, Lincoln Continental. Of course, there are tons that I'd want in the game, but I had to file it down to a car which has never been featured in the franchise, which I've always wanted to be featured in the franchise. And funnily enough, it's not just Gran Turismo that often overlooks this car. It's never been featured in Forza either, even though they've had the Cinque. And that is, of course, the Zonda F. I want to experience a fully detailed, perfectly proportioned, well-rendered Pagani Zonda F in the world of Gran Turismo Sport. The graphics would be incredible. As long as they got the sound right, which again we'll come back to in a second, it would sound incredible. The Zonda F is one of the best sounding cars ever made, easily. It's, in fact, not even close against many supercars. It's incredible. And the performance would be great as well. Of course, N600 with just over 600 horsepower. I'd probably go for the coupe. I prefer the Roadster in the real world, but there's no need for it in the game. So go for the hardtop version. Gorgeous liveries would abound for that car. We've had the Zonda R, of course, which is pretty much the closest thing to it in terms of a second generation Zonda. And Forza, as I said, has had the Cinque. Very few games have had the F though, and even fewer games have had it right or done it right. Test Drive Unlimited is pretty much the best example. Test Drive 2 in particular, it sounds fantastic, it looks fantastic. Even Project Gotham has it, but it's not great. It actually looks kind of weird, it's a bit dumpy, the performance isn't all that great. So Test Drive Unlimited 2 is definitely the pinnacle of Zonda F representation, and that game is almost, like a decade old now? That cannot remain the case. We've got to have better representation for one of the best supercars ever made, and as I've said before, I believe is the most exquisite supercar ever made. So those are my 9 cars: Espace F1, Helmet TX, Maserati MC12, Ferrari FF, SSC Ultima Aero, Panoz LMP1, Aston Lola, Mosler, and Zonda F. What then as far as the tracks? Well, of course, once again, this is a difficult one to choose, and I know many of you guys would happily swap the 9 cars and 2 tracks for 2 cars and 9 tracks or even more, but I wanted again to keep the kind of formula that we've had. So the 2 tracks that I chose are actually Italian and one is American. They are both brand new to the franchise. One is a track which I had no interest in until I started playing Ride, the motorbike game, and the footage you can see here is on that circuit, and that track is of course the relatively short but definitely sweet Imola. I love the Imola circuit. It's a fantastic track, very high average speed, with some surprisingly tight corners, but a great flow overall around the track. If you've never experienced it, well, of course you just never have. And it's not the kind of track that I think everyone would love, but at the same time, it's not the kind of track that I think anyone would hate. It's the kind of circuit where some people would think it's okay, and some people would think it's fantastic. I'm, of course, in the latter camp. Strange choice, perhaps, when you can only pick two, but I just love Imola so much, and Ride really made me fall in love with the track. A lap takes about a minute and a half, 2 minutes on something like a Ducati, so as I said, it's a relatively short and sweet circuit, but you can have so much fun. It's got a wide road, as I said, tons of high-speed sections. And the second one is probably my favourite racetrack that Gran Turismo's never had. Again, Forza has had this one. Road Atlanta. Road Atlanta is a track which could easily be overlooked for the sake of stuff like Infineon or Road America even, both of which I also love. But for me, Road Atlanta just has this charm to it. I always think of this track as synonymous with Panos and the Petit Le Mans series. It's just a great track, similar in some ways to Imola in terms of having a relatively short lap time, but also a lot of high-speed sections. You've got a couple of long straights, one very long straight in particular, but some deceptive, winding corners. It's a great-looking track. It's very summery, very happy. The track just has a lot of charm, in my opinion, and it's a perfect, I would say, clubman track. Something to take like GT3 cars around, but at the same time you can get incredible flying laps in prototypes as well. So those two in particular would be my choices, Imola and Road Atlanta. But it was very, very hard to narrow it down. I was considering having one new track and one returning track, and my new track would have been Road Atlanta, and my returning track would have definitely been Seattle, my favourite track that's no longer featured in Gran Turismo, but ultimately I went for Imola instead, because at the end of the day, as much as I would like to see something like Seattle or Complex String return, I already know what those tracks are like in Gran Turismo, whereas I don't know what Imola would be like in Gran Turismo because it's never been there, so I'd rather try something absolutely new. So far, we have 9 cars, 2 tracks. This is where it gets interesting, and this is where it gets super creative as well, because now you can pick 3 features that you'd like to see in the game. Now, you could, in effect, go as broad as you want. Now, the 3 features that I've chosen are, firstly, better visual tuning. So, in other words, bring back the GT Auto Shop from the previous Gran Turismo games, but GT6 in particular, with body modifications. We already have wheel rims, we already have livery, but I'm talking about better racing mods, in effect. Stuff like rear wings, winglets, body kits, potentially. And I'm not talking Need for Speed wide arch kits necessarily, but stuff that can actually help the car's performance, but simultaneously be used for like a car show, or just to make a car look better in general. And I would say try to go more for actual tuning parts, rather than just this generic looking kit that all of the Gran Turismo cars had, like in Gran Turismo 5, where they made the race car variants and they all just looked essentially like the same bodywork but fitted to a different car. And I know that visual tuning is something which a lot of you guys would like to see implemented as well, and they may well do it at some point, but I don't think so. It's a fairly big feature to add, so if they do add it, I think it probably wouldn't be yet anyway. The next one is similar, but more on the performance side of things. Broaden the selection of upgrade parts. This is something which I've talked about before on the channel. They've pared it back more and more, which is ironic given that the kind of fan base that the game is trying to appeal to, by definition, knows more about racing. The whole FIA integration is not exactly geared towards beginners. So making it super simplified and very, in effect, dumbed down doesn't really make much sense. In fact, if there was ever any Gran Turismo game that was justified in having the most complex tuning parts, it's this one. This is the game that would need to have that. So bring back turbos. Bring back proper weight loss, not just a sliding scale that arbitrarily drops or increases the weight and power. We need it more in depth than that. That, of course, again, is something which a lot of you guys want as well, and maybe even take it further than it was before. For instance, on Gran Turismo 4, there was a particular tuning part which is very easy to forget about because it wasn't featured since, as far as I can remember, and that is displacement. To be able to bore out an engine. Now, you couldn't do it to that many cars. The Skyline GTR was one of the very few that you could do it to, but that is something that isn't exactly rare in the tuning world. There are plenty of tuning houses, plenty of cars that you can do that to. I mean, in theory, you can pretty much do it to any car. And so, in effect, re-implementing stuff like boring out the engine or various other parts, superchargers, turbos, it's something which has already been a part of the Gran Turismo franchise, so of course most of us would want to see it return, especially those of us who have been around in the franchise for some time. And my third and final feature is maybe a less obvious one, but it's one which a lot of us have kind of wanted without really knowing it, and that is an auction house. Of course, Gran Turismo 5 had that, and the reason why I want it to return is twofold. Because for one thing, many of us don't want multiple duplicates of the same car, even though we keep winning the same ones every day. That certainly happens to me. I've got like 6 Supras, 5 LaFerraris, and as cool as it might sound, it's irrelevant. You don't need that many. So at least being able to sell them at all would be an improvement. But a full auction house would be a far better option, because then you could not only dump the car yourself and get some cash out of it, but you could actually benefit other players, because you could sell it to them instead of just dumping it into the ether, and potentially earn a little bit more than you could by selling it from the garage. So it improves the community experience, it gets people having more and more communication, more involvement with each other in the community, and that can never be a bad thing. And of course, people are always worried about selling like modded cars and stuff, but that's not exactly an issue now. You don't exactly see a huge amount of modded cars in GT Sport, if any. So why not include an auction house? I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to include something like that, or at least try to adjust being able to sell cars, or, I mean, at the bare minimum, get rid of winning the same cars over and over again. Have some kind of random system where it doesn't give you the same car too close together, at least, but we'll have to see. And finally, of course, the fixes. Again, you could be very creative with this one, and I do want to stress this entire list is by definition very personal, so all of these are of course my choices for making my game experience the best that one update could make it be. So there are definitely a couple of things, one in particular that I could think of which doesn't apply to me at the moment, which a lot of people want, and that is changing the sportsmanship rating parameters, like the etiquette, that kind of stuff in a race. I still haven't done a single online race in GT Sport. My sportsmanship rating is like E, with B on whatever the other one is. So I'm level 50 with not a single online race done. That doesn't bother me, and the reason why I haven't done it is purely because I don't have a huge amount of spare time to race online. Most of the time that I'm on the game, as I've said before, I'm either preparing a video or recording one. I don't generally just play Gran Turismo that much. So for me, that one wouldn't be as important. I know for many of you it would. So the two fixes that I'm going to choose, as I said, you can be pretty broad and creative with this as to what fix is defined as. But for me, the most important one would be to reassign Group X, because it doesn't work. It's as simple as that. I don't care if you like Group X or not, you cannot justifiably say that it makes any kind of sense. Some of the cars do, and that's why I'm not saying that Group X needs to go, I'm saying it needs to be reassigned, because there is no reason to have a BMW i3 in the same category as a Tomahawk X. That's ridiculous. The Formula cars, they need their own category. The classic race cars need their own category, and that's why I said reassign Group X, because I do believe that it has a place. But what I would include in Group X is just the absolutely untouchable cars. So in other words, the Tomahawks. Put the Tomahawks in Group X. Put the 1,600 horsepower Veyron Vision GT, or Veyron, the Bugatti Vision GT in Group X as well. The cars which are absolutely untouchable. Now you could argue that for a Formula car, but not really, because as I said, give it its own category, like Group F or something for Formula. Likewise with the classic race cars, they deserve to be raced more. Something like the BMW, there's no question there. That deserves to be, of course, in N100, N200, whatever, depending on tuning. And even something like the drift car or the Isle of Man time attack machine. that deserves to be in some kind of racing class or some kind of N class. Maybe not N class as far as its competitiveness goes. So just put it in a race class. Put it in some kind of class of its own. Maybe Group X, but I think you can do better than that. The drift car could easily go into the N classes because it's just not competitive enough to win anyway. So you might as well put it there. Or put it in a Group D for drift cars, for instance. Drift cars have been a part of the franchise for a long time. So basically, reassign how Group X works and make it better, make it make sense. And again, I did a whole video about this, so that was months ago, and we're still no closer. In fact, we're further away than we were then as far as making Group X a worthwhile thing. And my second fix, and this is where, as I said, you can get really broad as to defining what you mean by fix, because it tends to be glitches and things that are wrong, but I'm using my second fix, so in other words, just something that you want improved about the game, a redux of car sounds. Because when I play a game, I don't necessarily want it to sound exactly like real life. And that might sound like a strange thing to say, because surely you want it to be as realistic as possible. You don't want vacuum cars. Well, yes and no, because that is true, that I do want it to sound good, like real life. But if a car actually does sound like a vacuum, which, let's be honest, some race cars do, the racing diesels at Le Mans don't exactly sound that good, then make them sound better than real life. And that is something which Gran Turismo can definitely learn from Forza, because although Forza does fall into the trap of using the same sounds for multiple cars, you can justifiably, especially with the limited car list in comparison to other games that GT Sport now has, you can justify having each car sound just that little bit different, unless of course they share an engine, but also exaggerate them. The whole point of playing the game is to do things that you either can't do in real life or aren't in a position to do. So make the gaming experience better than real life. Make the graphics real, make the physics real, but then make the sound more visceral. Make the Jaguar F-Type pop and bang like it should. Make the Formula car, the F1500 TA, scream more. Make the cars, I don't know, meatier in effect. Make the muscle cars rumble more. They sound pretty good already, but make them even better. Over-engineer the sounds. Of course, make the Mazda 787B sound like it actually should, on idle especially. And so yeah, that's my ultimate update. My 9 cars, my 2 tracks, my 3 updates, and my 2 fixes. So, of course, doubtless you've already started typing yours probably right at the start of the video down below, so looking forward to reading all of those. And of course, if you are watching this video on the day of release, which most of you will be, I will be announcing the 6 winners of the 25k giveaway later on today. So of course stick around for that. We've had around 400 entries, so each person's chances aren't huge, but of course by definition there are going to be 6 winners, and so as I said, stick around for that. But you can click through here at the end to see other episodes of Beards in Cars, other topics, countdowns, discussions, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.